Hi to all the people trickling in. This is Liz at Headset. We are going to get started in just a few minutes. We'll probably start 2 or 3 minutes past the hour as we let everybody gather in. I'm going to mute myself and leave the slide up, and I will be back in 2 or 3 minutes. All right, I still see some of those participant numbers logging in. So we do have a few more people than usual today. I'm going to give us just 1 more minute to get everybody logged in before we start. So I'll be back in 1 minute to start the presentation. All right, everyone. Welcome to Headset's May webinar series. Today, we're very excited to share this webinar with Nielsen, who will be providing some of the data as well. Before we get started, I want to just talk a little bit about the webinar format. So both myself and Rick Maturo are going to do some presenting. There is a chat window where you ask some questions. Feel free to put your questions in there. A little bit difficult for us to read and answer the questions without having people around to help us. What we're going to do is answer those questions in a blog post after the webinar is over. So we'll send a blog post out to everybody attending as well as slides, answers to those questions where we can answer them. So feel free to put your questions in there. Just know that we probably won't be getting to them today. Also like to say I'm presenting from my house. So please excuse if you hear my dog bark or if perhaps I forgot for a moment as we're trying to work through how to do these webinars from home. So I think that those are all the things I need to tell you before we get started. Let's dive right in. I am Liz Connor, Director of Analytics at Headset. And today I'm going to be talking about some of Headset's data around adult use cannabis consumers in the United States. I also have joining me Rick Toro from Nielsen, who is the Associate Client Director in the Cannabis vertical. Rick, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Thanks so much, Liz, for introducing me.
Great. All right, so before we get started, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about Headset. Headset is a cannabis data intelligence company, and we have three main product offerings. The first one is called Insights, which is market intelligence products. In Insights, we provide daily product level information on sales trends to help producers, manufacturers, and retailers understand the adult use cannabis market space. In Insights, you can find information on sales, brand rankings, pricing trends, and even analyze market events like the impacts of 420 or COVID-19 on the cannabis industry. We have a second product called Retailer. Retailer is a business intelligence tool for cannabis retailers to assist these retailers with tracking their sales, optimizing their inventory, and streamlining their operations. This tool is meant to help retailers gain a better understanding of their data and use their own data to make data-driven decisions. In addition, we recently added a benchmarking section, which allows retailers to compare their store to the market to determine if they have the optimal assortment, pricing strategy, or are pacing with the current growth. We also added a new retailer premium product recently, which allows retailers to dive deeper into their data and do things like market basket analytics, marketing referral analytics, and even dive into their consumer. And finally, we have Bridge. Bridge is our vendor managed inventory tool. This tool allows retailers to directly share their data with vendors so that parties can better manage the store's inventory and get the products where they are needed to avoid out of stock or overstock issues. And now I'm going to let Rick go ahead and introduce Nielsen's cannabis practice.
Thanks, Liz. If you want to click 4 times for me.
So I have, can you see it?
Yes, I can see it great.
Great.
Thank you.
This is going well. I'm excited.
So hi, everyone. So Nielsen does have a dedicated practice dedicated to the cannabis area, both hemp CBD and THC dominant marijuana and CBD dominant marijuana, those products that are selling primarily through dispensaries. What I really love about the practice that we've set up here at Nielsen is no matter where you are in your research trajectory or with your research needs, chances are we have a product that's going to work for you. So whether you're interested in really getting to know and understand consumer sentiment and what's driving consumers to use certain types of products, we certainly have a couple of solutions there. If you need to understand what's selling in Nielsen's track channels for hemp CBD, certainly that's something that we can do as well. We also have a service if you're looking to better understand how to connect with consumers and what types of marketing and messaging is going to work well and they're going to respond well to. We have a product for that too. And then certainly if you're just interested in a couple of different categories, we also have some category specific reports that we offer as well. So again, I think no matter where you are, chances are you could benefit from some of the information that we have at Nielsen's cannabis practice. So with that, let's just hop right into it. So, I think everyone would not be surprised to say that the world is a totally different place than it was, March 1st. People are sheltering at home. People are dealing with a lot of economic uncertainty, a lot of anxiety, a lot of just wondering what the next day of news is going to bring. But we do know that prior to COVID, there certainly was cannabis, and that after COVID, there's certainly going to be cannabis. So if we're talking about how many consumers are actually out there today that are consuming these different categories of cannabis products, we've done some pretty robust research into that area where we talked to close to 30,000 consumers and asked them about their behaviors, their sentiment, and how they're using these products. And what we found is that about 18% of the US adult population claims to have consumed or legally consumed a THC dominant marijuana product. So whenever you hear me say THC dominant marijuana, that just refers to a marijuana product where the concentration of THC is higher than the concentration of CBD in that product. So with that, certainly we've seen CBD dominant marijuana grow in the last couple of years, but certainly not to the level that THC dominant marijuana has. Seeing about 8% of the US adult population claiming that they've consumed a CBD dominant marijuana product. And then on the other side of the spectrum, the unregulated side of things, hemp CBD, again, we're seeing close to 20% of the US adult population claiming to have consumed any of these products. Now, when we talk about consumption, just want to state that this is ever consumed. If we talk about people that are consuming with some regularity, these numbers are a little bit lower. For hemp CBD and THC dominant marijuana, it's closer to 10%. And then for CBD dominant marijuana, it's closer to 4% they're consuming with any regularity. So just keep that in mind. If we look at this next slide here, we really want to try and understand how these different categories are going to grow in the next 12, 24 months or so. So again, in that same consumer research, we asked every consumer that we talked to how likely they are to purchase any of these 3 different categories in the next 12 months if they were legally available. And what you can see here is that THC dominant marijuana tops out at about 27% of the US adult population claiming that they want to consume a THC dominant marijuana product in the next 12 months. CBD dominant marijuana, a little bit higher, about 30% of the US adult population claiming they want to consume a product in the next 12 months. Hemp CBD, which right now is federally legal and pretty much available coast to coast, all 50 states can get it online, get it in different stores. That one we do see the highest future intent at 34% of the US adult population claiming they're going to consume. And just to give you guys some perspective, when we look at some of those more established legal marijuana markets, places like Colorado and Washington, we do tend to see that the penetration is coming in right around this 27% number. So in a fully national legal marketplace in the US, you can think that about 27% of the US adult population would be consuming in an ideal scenario where it's federally legal for them to do so. So if you go to the next slide, what we want to really understand is how do we kind of get here, and then what is that growth going to look like in the next 12 months if we hit that ultimate trajectory? So if we look at this measure here in purple, we call this conversion. And essentially what we're doing is we're combining the percent of US adults who say that they're likely to consume any of these categories and dividing that by the number of consumers who say they have consumed it in the past 12 months. So for THC dominant marijuana, we've converted about 70% of those consumers. So put another way, about 70% of those who want to consume THC dominant marijuana products have already done so. Again, if we look at CBD dominant marijuana, that conversion rate's a lot lower just because we know these products, though they've been in dispensaries now for a couple of years, are still growing and consumers are still coming around to realizing all the benefits that a CBD dominant marijuana product can offer them as well. If we talk about hemp-derived CBD, those products that, again, are now moving through conventional retail channels and increasingly so, you can see that that conversion is only at 52%. So put another way, we have 48% of those folks out there that want to consume a hemp CBD product that haven't done so today. If we look at user growth, so again, comparing the current consumption against what that future number could be, you could see that for THC dominant marijuana, you're looking at a growth factor of almost 1.5 times. For CBD dominant marijuana, because it has such lower penetration right now, that user growth could reach upwards close to 4 times growth in the next 12 months if we were to hit that saturation rate. For hemp CBD, again, looking at a growth of about 2 times the growth. But do really want to just talk to hemp CBD really fast, just on this next slide here, just to level set. So I think a lot of folks on the phone are probably pretty familiar with the dispensary landscape or understand that there's this whole other channel where people are getting legal marijuana products. When we talk about hemp CBD, you can really get them from a variety of different channels. But what we've seen at Nielsen is that right now, hemp CBD really isn't moving through a lot of the major retailers that Nielsen's tracking sales for. So those are predominantly those major food, drug, mass merchandisers and convenience store retailers that we're talking here. Right now, they're representing only about 16% of all the purchases that people have told us that they've been making within the hemp CBD category. Now, certainly, we do expect that this is going to change once we get some updated FDA guidance allowing for hemp CBD ingestible products to be put onto the shelves of major retailers. Right now, the FDA has said that that is illegal. And so a lot of these major chains are pretty risk averse. So right now, really all you're going to see at a Walgreens, a CVS, for example, is really going to be those topical products. So again, just understand that hemp CBD really not moving as much through traditional food, drug, mass, and convenience channels just yet, but that should change. If you go to this next slide here, we talk about why people are using cannabis and why cannabis, seems like it's almost built for this type of self-isolation and this whole COVID period. And I think it really comes down to the needs that cannabis is solving for consumers. So we have a bunch of different proprietary segments that we bucket consumers into, but if we look and roll all those segments up, they really all fall into one of these 5 buckets that consumers are really using cannabis products to satisfy. And what you can see here is there's a lot of overlap in terms of THC dominant marijuana products and CBD dominant products, whether they're from hemp CBD or whether they're derived from marijuana. When we talk about THC dominant marijuana products, those that have a higher concentration of THC in them, we know that consumers are also getting a couple of added additional needs satisfied if they want, particularly around experience enhancement and socialization. Now for COVID, clearly socialization, unless you're doing Skype calls or doing a house party or something like that, probably isn't going to be a need that's going to really pop during COVID. But for experience enhancement, you could absolutely understand why people would want to use a THC dominant product during this time. You can only watch Kimmy Schmidt so many times or The Office reruns so many times before they start to get a little bit old. Same thing when we talk about holistic health. So people looking to cannabis products to help with things like anxiety or sleep or other mental health issues that may be exacerbated during this time of uncertainty. And if you go to the next slide, you can see these are actually the top 5 needs across these 3 different categories that consumers told us that they're using these products for today. And again, you see a lot of competition across all 3 of these and a lot of the same items really showing up, particularly around relaxation, sleep, and mental health. Again, with THC dominant marijuana, we see things like mood enhancement and enhancing at-home experiences also coming to the top because we know that THC dominant marijuana has those additional needs that can satisfy for folks. And again, 2 needs that are probably in pretty high demand right now for people wanting to have their spirits uplifted and wanting to have some novelty in terms of entertainment at home. So makes no surprise to me that we're seeing those. So now that we kind of understand what some of those key cannabis needs are and how some of those cannabis needs really can relate to the situation many consumers are facing with COVID, I'm going to turn it back over to Liz so she can talk about what we're seeing in terms of sales in the regulated dispensary landscape.
Thanks, Rick. All right, and I did see people's comments about my audio. I will try to talk a little slower so it's not so patchy, though the amount of caffeine I usually consume tends to preclude me from talking too slow, but I will do my best. So what we're looking at here is adult use cannabis sales in the United States. This is sales in the regulated channel, so legal sales in dispensaries. What we see in 2019 is that looking at just these 4 US states, cannabis sales crested about $6 billion. So when you're thinking about the number of consumers Rick was showing and how many people that have wanted to purchase have made purchases, this will take that data and turn it into what that means for sales. We also can think to Canada. So Canada, it is nationally legal. And Canada right now is seeing about $150 million in monthly sales, which annualizes to about $2 billion. So already we're seeing a very large cannabis market, but let's look and see what COVID has done to change that. So we're gonna first baseline by looking at sales pre-COVID this year. And you're gonna see this graph a lot in my slides today. I kind of chose one consistent methodology to review a handful of different things. And if you are an Insights subscriber, this graph is now in your new COVID dashboards. So we can kind of go through this and you can go in there and dig deeper and see the data any way you like. But for right now, the way we'll look at it is we're going to baseline all of the sales on the first full week of January. So the week starting January 6th of 2020. We're going to look to see how sales are different with that as our baseline week. So here, what we see is we opened 2020 with pretty strong sales growth. You do see Washington slightly below that 0% line. That's pretty common in Washington. January sales are always soft here. I think it's all that missing sunshine. We all get sad and don't leave very often. But you can see that sales are generally pretty healthy, right around what we expect at the beginning of the year. At the outbreak of COVID, we saw remarkable growth in sales. If you look at those first couple of weeks in March, specifically the weeks starting March 9th, 16th, and 23rd, We saw sales volumes there increase to about 50% their levels of January. So this was as consumers were rushing to stores to stock up. This was the start of stay in residence orders for most of these states. We saw sales start to trail off, but a couple different states are looking pretty differently. And so what I want to do is dive into just two of those states and talk about them each individually. The first one being Washington. So in Washington, that very big sales spike that you see on the week of 3/16, that was when our stay in residence orders started. So people rushed out to stores. They didn't just panic buy hand sanitizer and toilet paper. They also rushed to their dispensaries and stocked up on cannabis products. We see that after that initial rush to stores, sales kind of tapered back to their normal levels. They have been relatively elevated through March, and that has been sustained in May, through March and April, and was also sustained in May. So we actually see that in Washington during this time, it looks like COVID has perhaps driven an increase in sales compared to what we would normally expect this time of year. That's in contrast to a state like Nevada. Now in Nevada, about 80% of total adult use marijuana sales occur in Clark County, which is the home of Las Vegas. With all the casinos closed, and the casinos closed, I think you'll be able to pretty easily tell this on the graph. The casinos closed on March 23rd. So that's where we see that line cross all the way down to a very negative territory. So as travelers stopped going to Las Vegas, we see that sales had a very big decline. I don't think that this is necessarily related to people that live in Nevada purchasing less marijuana. I think this is entirely driven by tourism. So this really highlights how sales can have very different trends depending on who was buying them, and how we have to think about how COVID has changed the way that people are operating their daily lives so that we can figure out what that means for our sales changes. Before I go too much further, I do want to get into a little day-to-day data. To keep this graph tidy, I ran it just for Washington, but in our COVID report, you can see it for all of the states, including Canadian provinces. Here, what we're looking at is median like store sales growth. And I want to point out a couple of things in this graph that I found to be optimistic for cannabis sales. The first one is the largest spike you see, which is 420. So we saw a strong 420 this year. Sales came in fairly similar to 420 sales in prior years. So we usually see about 100% lift during that time. This is exactly what we were hoping to see. It looks like COVID did not keep people away and did not drive people out of purchasing cannabis for the 420 holiday. This is an especially important day to a lot of cannabis retailers. And so we were very optimistic seeing that did increase so much. You do notice a little bit of spike in the few days leading up to 420. We actually saw that sales demand pushed a little bit into earlier in the week, which is atypical. We imagine that was as consumers tried to social distance. The other two spikes that I want to point out are those stock up spikes. So we see on I think it was on 3/16, we saw sales increase by over 100% on that day. That's typical. That's pretty close to 420 levels. So we really did see these giant sales spikes. This followed with a lot of interesting trends in the industry. So we saw inventory levels decrease. We saw a lot of stockouts during this time. We saw much higher average baskets. That happened a second time the next Monday on March 23rd. We also saw quite a large spike in sales. The last increase here that I want to point out happened on April 15th. So we see a pretty notable increase in sales on April 15th. This was the day that stimulus checks began to be issued to US citizens. And so this, to me, was very optimistic, perhaps pointing to an idea that maybe cannabis is a counter-cyclical good. So a good that increases in sales as economic uncertainty increases. So as people, as we see unemployment go up, perhaps we could see cannabis sales go up as people move into these products. That's typical, I believe, of tobacco as well. But adult use cannabis has not yet seen a negative business cycle. So these are kind of our first hints to be able to figure out what this could mean if we see unemployment stay high for some time, what that could mean for cannabis sales. Now, as we think about these increases in total sales, what I want to point out, something that was very interesting to me, was that most of these increases in sales are driven by larger baskets. So as people come into stores, right now, I believe almost all states are allowing online ordering and curbside pickup. Some states are even requiring it. And some states have had delivery and others have expanded the availability of cannabis delivery. So it's really changed the way that people have started shopping. While they are making these purchases at dispensaries still, it looks like a lot of people have moved to start to make these purchases online, or at least shop online beforehand. And this has led to an increase in average baskets in nearly every state. So we think as consumers remain mindful of social distancing and try to reduce these unnecessary encounters, we expect this to continue. So we think that consumers are coming in a little less frequently, but buying more when they're there. And I think that Rick can tell us a bit more about how this has impacted CBD shopping in traditional retail channels.
Yes, absolutely. So before we get to COVID, which we will talk about, I do again want to kind of level set and set the stage, because what we've seen since the Farm Bill passed in 2018 is that we've kind of reached this period where at conventional retail, we've really seen a point of stagnation in terms of chain brick and mortar retailers bringing in more hemp CBD products to place on the shelves there. So again, you can start to see after Mitch McConnell had asked the FDA, told him that he wanted 90 days to have them come to some sort of resolution to propel the hemp CBD industry forward. We start to see that leveling off there. Again, that 90 days passes, see just a slight little bump overall, but then really we hit COVID, the shelter at home order for most parts of the country by the week ending March 21st, and really we can start to see sales fall off. Now, if you go to the next slide, we know that if not as many retailers are stocking these products, and again, that's primarily due to the FDA, primarily due to the FDA not allowing these retailers to safely bring in these ingestible forms of hemp CBD. If you know that retailers aren't bringing in more products to the shelves, consumers aren't getting as many eyeballs on them. So what we ultimately saw was that across all these different brick and mortar channels that Nielsen's measuring in our census counts, we did see that dollar sales did decline significantly across all three of these, especially after that COVID period. Now, if you go to the next slide here, we can hone in specifically on that COVID period. And what you can see is that really did have a pretty big impact on CBD in those food, drug, and convenience channels where it's currently being sold. So if we compare sales for the week ending 2/29 and compare them to the week ending 4/18, what we saw was a negative sales decline of about 26.5%. If you compare those 2 weeks. Now, we put a lot of thought to wonder, what could have been going on there and why we saw those sales decline. And the one thing that we can absolutely rule out is price. You can see here on this black line that the average price really didn't fluctuate all that much prior to COVID and certainly in that COVID period. So it's not that, retailers were hiking up the price on these things or were drastically cutting the price or anything like that. So if you go to the next slide, though, what you can really see is that some CBD sales were actually more impacted than some of the other CPG categories that Nielsen's measuring as well. So again, if we look at that sales decline, comparing the weeks 2/29 to 4/18, if we look there, you can see that some of the more lifestyle items that probably aren't as essential, like bath and shower CPG products, decline more than the aggregated CBD decline across all those channels. Certainly things like pain relievers didn't see as much of a fall off, just because we know that people are probably stocking up on those. They know that they may run into an issue at being at home, get hurt. Same thing for beverages. People are going to need to stock up on a lot of liquid. Hopefully this is more water than it is alcohol. But again, beverages not falling anywhere near as much as the aggregated CBD in those census channels that we've seen. And if you go to the next slide, we also saw some differences when we looked at different categories and different channels that were selling some of those hemp CBD products. So for example, if you look here at the table on the left, what you can see is food and drug retailers actually saw more of a sales decline than what we saw at C stores. And there's a couple of reasons for why that may be, but ultimately, we think that given folks that maybe are living in more urban areas or folks who live in more rural areas, these C stores and these gas station mini marts and that, they really are a prime source of shopping for those folks. So, they're probably going in there to stock up on other items. And because we know C stores have been a little bit more aggressive with stocking some of these alternative forms of hemp CBD beyond the topicals, they probably didn't see as much of a hit. And to support that assertion, we can also look at some of the changes that we saw in terms of sales by actual CBD category. So if we look at ingestibles, for example, products like gummies and tinctures and capsules, they fell 25% less than what you were seeing for the total hemp CBD category, the aggregated hemp CBD category there. Versus something like a topical pain reliever or a hand and body lotion, fell more significantly than what we saw for ingestibles. And I think some of that traces the fact that some of these ingestible folks, they may have some more serious conditions that they were looking to treat and wanted to make sure that they had product on hand. Versus some of these topical pain relievers and some of these hand and body lotions, they're definitely important to have a strong place in consumers' mindsets. But when it comes to an emergency, probably not the first thing that people are thinking about as much as some of these other product categories. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Liz so she can talk about how some of those behaviors actually changed at the dispensary and what they were seeing.
Thanks, Rick. All right. So Rick kind of gave us an idea of what types of things were being purchased differently, and I'm going to dive a little bit into that. But first, one of the things I want to talk about is rather than what is being purchased differently, I want to talk about when things are being purchased differently. And the first thing that we're looking at here is a graph broken down by the hour of the day for that day's sales. So we're looking at weekdays here, and really the big takeaway from this slide is that as time has progressed, so as we move more and more into April and May, we see those orange lines where the data has moved to the left. So this means that people are shifting their purchases to early hours of the day. This is really notable. If you look back for years of data, you would see everything kind of fall more along those gray lines, especially that shaded gray area pre-COVID. So we saw, especially on weekdays, a lot of afternoon shopping, a lot of early evening shopping. I think a lot as consumers commuted home, they stopped by dispensaries on their way homes. We see that change and move into these earlier hours, probably as people have begun to change their habits for when they're shopping. We know that this is true in grocery stores as well, in convenience stores. People are trying to move their shopping so that they can support social distancing. And I thought this was very interesting, this super notable change. Another really notable change is the day of the week people are shopping. So this graph tells us the percent of a week's sales by the day of the week. So here we're looking at everything pre-COVID. So those gray lines are normal weeks. The colored lines are weeks of holidays. So those are always a little unusual. But save for weeks that have holidays, what we found was that Fridays generally were between 18 and 20% of a store's sales, maybe 21%. Saturdays were the next largest day, though they were almost always smaller than Fridays. And Sundays kind of brought us back into this general week. We saw a couple really notable things happen. So the first was, especially during the first few weeks where stay-in residence orders saw sales shift very early in the week, especially on Mondays. This is super different than what we had anticipated before, and really changed the way that cannabis retailers had to staff their stores and had to stock their stores to keep up with demand. Now that we have kind of settled into this new normal, what we found is that while Fridays still generally are the largest day for sales, that percent influence has decreased quite a bit. So sales on Fridays are about 6 to 7% less of the week than they used to be. And on Saturdays, that's 4 or 5% less. That's all been shifted into earlier into the weeks. So a lot more Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday shopping than there used to be. We also see Sundays have seen a pretty good decline, and this seems to have been sustained. So we expect this could just be a shift in consumer behavior until we're out of the phased approaches coming back into stores. This could also be due to some of the shopping online that people are doing, changing the times of day when they're purchasing. So if you're a cannabis retailer trying to get ready for how many people do you need in your store, it might be time to review whether or not you're staffing your store given these new changes, because it is so historically different. I also want to talk a little bit about who is in there shopping. So here what we're looking at is the market share by generation. And the one I want to point out the most is down there at the bottom. It's Gen Z. So Gen Z has seen an increasing market share. That's because they're aging into the market. So people in Gen Z, I think are 23 or 24 at the oldest. And so every year or every day, more people in Generation Z age into the cannabis market. But we've seen a really notable pickup in their market share lately. So it seems as though during this time, Gen Z is more likely to be shopping. They're increasing their cannabis wallet even faster than other generations. And next, what I'd like to talk a little bit about are some of the products that we see doing differently. So Rick talked a bit about some of the CBD products. These differences in product shares also occur in our regulated channels. And so here what you're looking at, like I said, this is the same graph that we were looking at before. We're basing everything off that January 6th. So this is comparing flower and pre-rolls. So what we see is that pre-rolls have seen a pretty notable decline in sales during this time. It's especially true in those mid to late weeks in March when COVID was still really new and people were very concerned about respiratory issues with COVID. But we see that their sales, pre-roll sales, have stayed down during this time. If we think about how people or why people consume pre-rolls, I think that we can maybe give a few hypotheses here as to why this is occurring. I believe a decent amount of pre-roll purchases are for people to share. So often when we have pre-rolls, we stand in a circle, we share them around with others. There's not a lot of being around other people right now. I have not yet found a way to pass a joint over Zoom, but if anyone has, let me know. Though we did do a cute video, pass a bong, that was adorable. But you can't really pass those around. And so I think that's something that's led to this notable decline in pre-roll sales. But I want to bring up another point. So as soon as we are able to gather in groups again, I'm not sure that we will see pre-rolls return to their pre-COVID levels, because I don't think that even when we want to be around one another, we're probably going to be sharing something that's been in each other's mouths. So this is a time as a brand or as a retailer to start thinking about your strategy for what will the world look like 6 months from now, and what does that mean for the products that we're selling? Could that fundamentally alter the product mix? And what we've seen here is that pre-rolls have seen sustained downward sales. Now, they have not gone to zero. There are still a lot of other reasons to consume pre-rolls. My favorite reason to consume pre-rolls is they are so convenient. You don't really need much else other than a lighter, and man, it's easy to bum a lighter from someone. So I don't think we're predicting these to go too much lower than they are, but it could shift the dynamic here. The next two that I'd like to point out are edibles and topicals. So edibles are that dark line up on top, and topicals are that light kind of purple line on the bottom. So what we saw is edibles tend to look like the average market here. They're doing slightly better than the market around them. But topicals were performing quite poorly for a while, though they have started to recover. When you think about cannabis topicals, they usually are marketed for one of two reasons. One would be pain management. That's the predominant marketing of topicals in this space. The other is beauty. So things like wrinkle creams, face creams, night creams. And so when we think about how consumers' lives have changed, there's fewer people commuting to work. There's higher unemployment. These are usually work is one of the reasons that people have pain. So there could be a lot less pain right now. And when we think about things like night creams and wrinkle creams, very few of us have to interact with other people. I know myself, I did not bother to put on any of my wrinkle cream, as I knew none of you would be seeing my face today, which is a little different than if I had done a data night instead, like we used to do these. So this is, again, something that has changed in the way that consumers' lives, or in the way that consumers' lives have changed due to COVID. We do see their consumption patterns change. Lastly, before I turn it back over to Rick, what I want to point out is in the edibles segment, or in the edibles category, excuse me, the difference in sales for products that contain CBD versus those that are THC only. And primarily what I want to point out here is the right half of the graph, where we see these products generally see similar sales trends. So those with CBD and those that are THC only generally see similar sales trends. To me, this means that we haven't seen a rush for one product or the other, but it also means, I think that Rick was showing a bit of negative sales volume or negative sales trends for CBD in some of the non-regulated channels. But here it looks like they are relatively similar. And when we think about why someone might consume something with CBD, perhaps we can gain a little bit of light on that. And I'm going to turn it back over to Rick to talk about some of those use case reasons.
Thanks, Liz. So one of the cool things that we've learned really from consumers and from these healthcare practitioners during this time.
Sorry.
Yep, there you go. Yep. So one of the things that we've done that we've learned that's pretty cool is we actually surveyed about 300 different healthcare practitioners in the month of April. So, when all this COVID stuff was going down. And what we found is that consumer conversations with their physicians are changing. So this is the second iteration of the study that we've run. And, this time around, we did actually add in COVID. And I was very surprised to hear from physicians that about 1 in 4 patients, when they talk about CBD, are talking about with respect to COVID-19. But what I thought was also really telling is that we did see lift in a couple of other conditions that patients were bringing up with their physicians, primarily rooted in sleep and mental health. And I thought it was interesting that we saw a lift in this period compared to the last time we ran the study, because as we know, lots of people are probably dealing with sleepless nights now. Again, a lot of uncertainty, and people that maybe already had pre-existing mental health conditions, those are probably being exacerbated by some of this COVID stuff. So no surprise, again, that we're seeing an uptick in consumers talking to their physicians about these types of conditions when we're talking about CBD. Now, if we go to the next slide, did want to hone in a little bit more on those folks who told us that they're using THC dominant marijuana products for mental health. And to Liz's point, edibles did score very high for mood elevation, but also for people looking to quell things like anxiety or feelings of depression. So goes right along with her key takeaway there. But if we really want to understand who some of these folks are that are using those THC dominant products for mental health, right off the bat, we can see that they're a little bit different than what the general population tends to look like, and even a little bit more different than the population who's using THC dominant products for other things like experience enhancement or socialization. So the thing that stuck out to me is that these folks that are really using these types of products for mental health, they tend to have a lot lower of a household income. They're not too different in the sense that they mirror the standard THC dominant marijuana user. So in terms of age and gender, they're most likely to be in that male 25 to 34, but also the younger females also over index as well. What I also thought was interesting is those folks that are using it for mental health, they're more likely to actually have children in their household, which is a little bit different than the typical THC dominant marijuana user. But what I really want to focus in on are some of these lifestyles and some of these behavior stages that we looked at for these folks using THC dominant products for mental health. I think people, when they think of the standard marijuana user, oftentimes they may be thinking of someone in a more urban location, someone who's a little bit more hip in that. But what we found is that when we talk to those people who are really using for mental health, they tend to be much more blue collar, everyday type workers. So you can see they're really over indexing in those geographic areas that would be labeled as hardworking cities or outskirts, or even some of those hardworking rural living type areas that aren't even in a major city. Again, those folks, they tend to be younger, and they tend to be in some of those younger and startup families. So, you see millennial singles and couples, and then even some of these younger millennial families really popping up for using THC dominant products for mental health. But what I really wanted to do was take this a step further. So if we go to the next slide, we not only know, things about these people that we can help target and understand them better, but we also understand where they're located geographically. So if we look at this map of Los Angeles, California here, these are actually the demand rankings by all the zip codes that are in Los Angeles. And you can see the areas that really pop in this green color where they're indexing 120 or higher really do tend to be in some of those more hardworking, lower socioeconomic areas of the Los Angeles city here. So you can see places like Compton are certainly using THC dominant products to help maintain better mental health. Places like Bell Gardens. But if we look at the flip side and look at some of those more affluent areas, places where people don't seem to need THC dominant products for mental health, places like Malibu, certainly even what would that be? Rancho Palos Verdes. I mean, these folks are near the beach. They may be in a little bit better condition than some of the more inland residents. So again, just a little bit to understand about who's using these products and how they're probably using them during this time of COVID-19. So you want to go to the next slide. We did just want to leave you guys with a couple of some of the key findings and some of the future implications that we think are coming out of this whole COVID period. So I'll read through a couple of these, but just know that, absolutely these are thought starters of things to get you thinking about how your business could be impacted, in this post-COVID period and what some of those long-term changes are. But, I think Liz, you'll agree with me on this one that marijuana doesn't seem like it was as impacted by COVID as perhaps some of those hemp CBD products that are moving through our retail channels. But as you noted, we did see some significant differences by market and by format. So if we think about that Washington comparison to Nevada, for example, or even looking at things like pre-rolls versus things like edibles. We also know that COVID really did disrupt some of that purchase cycle for folks and has altered the patterns with which they're buying products. Liz mentioned that we saw more sales happening earlier in the week, whereas it used to be more of a weekend type occasion. Certainly, COVID may have a long-term impact on some of these more shareable formats or these social formats. So again, things like pre-rolls where they're really predicated on socialization and sharing, people may not be wanting to do that after this COVID period, especially if we get these rolling viruses or we get a resurgence in COVID-19 virus like they're predicting may happen in November. Ultimately, we know there was a lot going on with state and federal laws surrounding the entire cannabis ecosystem, whether it's hemp-derived CBD or whether it's specifically focused on the more regulated channels and those marijuana dispensaries. We know that COVID had a short-term impediment to everything that was going on. I think the focus really is on getting this COVID situation under control and really helping the economy to bounce back. But with that, we also think that long-term, COVID probably is going to accelerate some of the more favorable legislation. This is especially true if you think about states that were kind of on the border or contemplating legalizing recreational marijuana. This could be a pretty big windfall and a new source of revenue for them that they otherwise didn't have. The governor of New Mexico, came out a couple of weeks back and said she wished that New Mexico had legalized marijuana for recreational use because that would be some additional revenue coming in during this time of economic uncertainty that they could deliver. Certainly, we know, as Liz mentioned, most states now really are moving towards this click and pick kind of model, or even some states now have at-home delivery. I think that's going to ultimately be a sticking point later on. I wonder if people are going to continue to purchase online. And I think for hemp CBD, especially where they know that there's a wider assortment out there, I think more people will continue to migrate online until we start to see some of those hemp CBD products like edibles and beverages showing up on the shelves of your conventional major retail chains. So again, could bring people more online. We also know that some of that sales dipped for those hemp CBD type categories because a lot of them are primarily topicals right now. We know that those tend to have a little bit longer of a purchase cycle than something like a 10-pack of gummies or a single-use beverage or something like that. So in some sense, some of the loss to those categories could just be that people weren't lining up when they were ready to replenish that stock of a topical type product. I think Liz also mentioned that we know that marijuana has been around for quite some time relative to this growing hemp CBD category. So to go along with the fact that people aren't using the products as much as they could, and they're taking longer to use them up, we know there's a lot of confusion out there with how people are using these hemp CBD products. They tend to have a higher price point. So unfortunately, some consumers think, well, I paid $65, for this 30-pack of capsules, rather than burning through them in 30 days, like I would probably be best to do so. I'm going to hold on to them and only use them when I'm really in a lot of pain. So again, So that purchase cycle gets a little bit wonky when we talk about hemp CBD. And then the last point that I want to leave you with, and then I know, Liz, you had a couple of things to add here, is that it seems like when we talk about retail, that marijuana really is kind of one of those counter-cyclical goods, that even in the bad times, people are going to continue to purchase it for the right or wrong reasons, and it's going to probably last out some of that storm. When we talk about hemp CBD, especially when we talk about hemp CBD in the brick and mortar channels that Nielsen's covering, we don't really think it's necessarily there yet. It's not a counter-cyclical good. It's not to say that folks that were buying online direct from the manufacturer aren't still doing so today and that they change their behaviors drastically, but just know that it seems like hemp CBD at retail probably not going to weather the storm right now as much as the regulated marijuana products are. So Liz, I don't know if you had any other points you wanted to add to this quickly.
Yeah, I'll just do a quick moment on it. And I think I had some questions similar to this in the Q&A, but I've been asked a lot to say what I think is going to happen throughout the year for cannabis. And I'm going to give the very typical analyst answer of it depends. And I think it depends primarily on a couple of things, but one is the market that you're talking about. So markets that are heavily influenced or heavily rely on cannabis tourism, I think are going to see continued sustained lower sales volumes. I think this will not be the year for them at all. I also think products that are generally meant to be shared in groups, like maybe those larger sizes of pre-rolls, probably will see weaker sales than they have in prior years. But I think at the same time, in a lot of markets and for a lot of products, this is actually going to lead to increased sales. Like Rick said, there isn't really a lot that we can be doing right now. And watching that episode of Kimmy Schmidt for the 4th time really isn't super fun. But maybe if you have some cannabis, it is. At least it is. It's more fun for me. So I think that we will see a fair amount of growth there. And if you are interested, we do have a COVID report that we put together, which if you're an Insight subscriber, you can have for free. And if you're not an Insight subscriber, you can purchase. That gets a little bit more into some of these trends. And has a little bit more about some of these deeper impacts. So impacts on things like value brands versus premium brands, or the impact on large size pre-rolls versus smaller size pre-rolls is all detailed in that report. And I believe that we also, Rick wanted to talk just a little bit about a report that we have that combines a bit of both data, which, there we go, Rick.
Yes, thank you. So last thing, to Liz's point, we have this Nielsen headset Cannapulse report that again is looking at some of these specific industries. So if you're interested in beauty, if you're interested in personal wellness, if you're interested in pet, beverage, or tobacco, we put together kind of these mini presentations that really focus in on these different areas. And what I really love about them is they not only combine a lot of the great Nielsen data, but they also pair in a lot of the great headset data and weave it into how cannabis is selling in the regulated channel for these different categories as well. And something that I also like about it is if you've enjoyed listening to my voice talk today, all of these decks come with a pre-recorded voiceover to give you all the latest and greatest insights that are going to be taken from these. So don't think that you're going to have to learn to present it yourself if you want to pass it around. You can just share that audio file. So without anything else, I want to thank everyone for tuning into the webinar. And I think they're going to be sending out a recording of this. And as Nick mentioned previously, we will also be sending out a blog post to answer some of the questions that you guys had.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining us today, Rick. We really appreciate all of your insight. It was nice to do this together. We'll hopefully do that in the future. And thanks to everybody attending. We really appreciate you dealing with us through the random audio issues and being here to learn a little bit more about cannabis data. Watch out for that email from us. And if you have any questions, reach out to anyone here at Headset. Thanks, everybody.